I mean, it used to be a thing that we particularly saw with PhD students, but it's definitely come back into the undergraduate community now as well. This idea that if you're not sacrificing your sleep, if you're not giving up your time, you're not overworking, then you're not taking it seriously, and that you will inevitably feel if you're not putting in every minute of every day, and that if you're doing anything other than studying, you should feel guilty. You should feel guilty if you're enjoying yourself rather than studying. And it's an anxiety driven thought that it's not true. I mean, there is that, it is in the narrative and the culture, but it's really unhelpful. There's only so many hours a day your brain can actually perform academically. There's a thing called cognitive load, and there's a limit to what we can learn in a one go. And then you need an opportunity to kind of integrate it into your learning, and then you can have another go again. So the idea that you can just keep going just doesn't really make sense, but it's a belief that people have.
Hello everyone, welcome to Cambridge from the Inside. Today we have another new guest with us today, quite an exciting podcast ahead. Gareth, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hello everyone. So my name is Dr. Gareth Hughes. I'm a psychotherapist by background, but spent my career really looking at student mental health and wellbeing and the overlap between that and learning and academic performance, which is what we're going to talk about today.
Nice, yes. So we're here to talk about Gareth's book, Be Well and Learn Well, and the overlap, which goes through the overlap of wellbeing and academic performance. So I studied at Oxford as an Oxford graduate myself. I think a lot more attention should be given to the overlap between wellbeing and learning. So we're going to go through some of these ideas that you've gone through in your book, and hopefully students who are currently studying at Cambridge or who are applying will be able to kind of use these tips to be able to improve their study lifestyles in order to improve both their well-being and academic performance. We've got a lot of questions here. But first I wanted to ask you, Gareth, what was like the motive behind writing your book?
Well, my career in this space has been quite unpredictable, really. I never intended to be doing any of this. This is kind of how careers actually work. It all was accident. So I started working in halls of residence at one point, and noticed that a lot of students were experiencing problems with their mental health, and started asking questions about it. And that eventually resulted in me getting a role being responsible for wellbeing in halls of residence. And then I trained to be able to do that role, and then qualified as a psychotherapist, and then moved into doing psychotherapy with students, and kept seeing students arriving in my room what could have been avoided if they'd been taught different things, if their course had been structured differently. And so started asking questions then about, well, why does this stuff keep going wrong? What's going on? And started doing more research then into all of that. And that they just kind of built and built and built. And over time, then I kind of built a level of expertise in this area. And then was invited to write the book because I was kind of becoming known for, talking about this and bring people's attention to it. And so I suppose my aim really was to try and avoid the students ending up in my room who didn't need to be there.
Yeah.
Because if people understood that relationship between well-being and learning, and were prioritizing their well-being more, but also knowing how to study effectively in ways that actually also protect your well-being, because the two things overlap in both directions, that actually more students could enjoy their time at university, could flourish while they were at university, and achieve academically, not having to sacrifice one for the other.
So I know that there's a lot of people, high-performing individuals who, for one reason or another, would just have never really believed that there's an overlap between well-being and academic performance or learning. What would you say to those individuals who have those beliefs?
Yeah, so I suppose there's a few ways to answer that. One is just to think about the fact that, I mean, your emotional well-being, your psychological well-being, and your academic learning are all happening in the same place. Right. It's all in your brain. And if you think about the fact that your brain's part of your biology and you're asking it to perform to a high level. So think of any other aspect of life where we're asking our bodies to perform to a high level. Marathon runners don't just run marathons. Cyclists don't just get on their bike and cycle for hours a day. They do a whole load of other stuff to look after their body so that they're able to perform to that high level. And it's exactly the same with academic performance. If you want to perform to a high level, if you want to do, world-leading research, if you want to come up with new ideas no one's had before, you've got to look after your brain. We know that the brain, when it goes into flow in order to be at its peak of performance, but it's really hard to go into that peak of performance if you don't have good well-being already. It's much easier to go into flow when your well-being is already good. Research around that's really clear. So really, I mean, it's just about, some of it's just about the biology of this. If you want your brain to perform well, you've got to look after it. And your brain is connected to the rest of your biology. It's connected to the rest of your body. We know that physical exercise improves brain function, fresh air, diet, sleep, all of these things matter. Socialization, actually socializing with other people improves your brain function. So if you want to perform well, you've got to do all this other stuff to look after it. And it's one of those things about, do we believe in evidence or do we not? Because common sense, which is the lack of evidence in the narrative we have, says if you work more hours, you'll get more done and you'll learn more. The evidence clearly says, actually, there's a point at which when you go past, your productivity not only goes down, it goes into reverse. Because you start to make mistakes, you learn things incorrectly, you've got to unlearn it and go back and redo the work again. So actually, you're doing less than you would do if you'd stopped a few hours ago. So basically, it's because the evidence is overwhelming.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds like you're saying that there's a lot of students and people out there who don't realize that there are like small things that they can do to their lifestyles that would have a massive impact in their learning, things that they think that are just completely unrelated to the work.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's a natural thing for us as human beings. One of the things we do is we hold different bits of our life in different departments, and we think that they're not connected to each other. But of course, everything's connected inside us. It's connected in our minds, in our brains, and in our bodies. And so what you're doing over here influences what happens over here. And you're absolutely right as well. It's just about making small changes. It's not that your well-being has to be perfect. But just making small improvements to it will give you more capacity to learn and to perform. And little changes to things like sleep, diet, exercise, having a bit of fun, those kinds of things can make a big difference to the other work that you want to do.
Nice. And I wanted to go back to your time working in the halls of residence, because I think it's really interesting to hear that, like, kind of the book, all of your work has been built off first-hand experience of seeing loads of students going through their different issues of well-being. Wanted to know, like, what kind of thing, what was the most common like issue that you saw with students and when you're working there?
I guess both in halls and in therapy, anxiety was the number one thing that came through the door, of different types. Some of that was anxiety about academic performance, exam anxiety, and public speaking anxiety, those kinds of things. Some of it was more generalized anxiety or social anxiety, has been a growing thing in the last few years. So anxiety was the number one thing that came through the door, and after that, sleep. Sleep was a big factor, and we saw a lot of students with poor sleep and then struggling with the consequences of that.
Yeah, and so with sleep, I think how does like sleep affect like our ability to learn? Because I think for a lot of people, I mean, it's kind of like a taboo thing to talk about as a student, but the idea is that you kind of do as much as you can on as little sleep as possible. A lot of people kind of live off that philosophy, and you can kind of continue living off that philosophy if you ignore the fact that you're having little sleep.
Yeah. Again, it's about whether you believe in evidence or not. So there's a number of things. We think of sleep as wasted time, but that's because we don't look at what actually happens. Our brain and our body are actually doing an awful lot of work when we're asleep. It's not a time when we're not doing anything. We're just not aware of it. In terms of learning, there's three things that we do while we're asleep that are really important before. But anyway, the first thing is we clear away clutter from the previous day. So you'll encounter lots of things during the day that you don't really need to remember. So your brain codes all of the things that we come across during the day in a various number of different ways as whether it's important or not. And if it's not important, it gets cleared away while we're asleep at night. So you're refreshing your memory, clearing up space to learn the next day. The second thing that happens is we actually move the stuff that's important into our long-term memory while we're asleep. So if you're not sleeping well while you're trying to revise for an exam, you're going to forget a lot of what you revised because that process isn't happening. The third thing that seems to happen is we appear to problem solve while we're asleep. So if you set a really difficult problem for two groups and then you pause, stop them from working on it, you just send one group off to rest and another to sleep and then bring them back to the problem. The group who've been asleep will solve the problem much more quickly. This is why you have your best ideas in the shower first thing in the morning. So again, if you're working on difficult problems, sleep's really important to that. It'll help you solve all of that. There's also seems to be something around muscle memory in terms of musicians talk about this a lot, and there's been some research on it that if they're trying to play a difficult piece that they can't quite get the hang of, if they go and get a good night's sleep and then come back to it, it suddenly seems to be there. It's in their fingers. So there's a lot that's happening when we're asleep. Now, on top of all of that, we also de-arouse emotions while we're asleep. So the emotions from the previous day get de-aroused while we're asleep. So we're in a better emotional state the next day. Our body also physically repairs and it tops up our glial cells with glucose while we're asleep so that we have energy for the next day. So if you're not sleeping, you're completely stripping out all of that. So you're coming into the next day, you don't have the energy levels you need. You're still carrying the emotions from the previous day. You've lost a lot of learning that all that effort that you've put in hasn't been remembered. And you've missed out on a whole chunk of problem solving opportunity. So it really makes no sense. And over time, all you're doing is you're just degrading your health and degrading your cognitive function, because when we get tired, our brain stops functioning as well. There's a breakdown in the way that different parts of our brain communicate with each other and in the functioning of our prefrontal cortex particularly. So what you end up with is in a situation where you're just not in a state to study to your potential at all. So it may make logical sense to say, if I give up 2 hours of study, of 2 hours of sleep to study, then I'll learn more, but you won't. And we can see this, and if there's actually research around students studying for an exams, and we know that if students sleep 8 hours or more in the approach to an exam, they outperform those who sleep less than 8 hours, even if those sleeping less than 8 hours use the time to study. Sleep is crucially important to our learning and our health, so it makes no sense to give it up whatsoever.
It's interesting. So, because from what you were saying about sleep, it sounds like if you're getting if you're getting less than 8 hours sleep, the amount of the studying that you're doing actually will go down the drain, so that you're actively the work that you're doing kind of goes to waste if you have poor sleep.
Some of it will, and it's roughly 8 hours. I mean, we're not talking about exactly, but all these things are rough, and they're all on a spectrum. Different people are on a slightly different spectrum. So it's not about getting perfect sleep, but good regular sleep absolutely means you will remember more.
Yeah,
you're far more likely to forget what you've learned if you're having poor sleep.
So there's an element of trying to preserve the work that we've the work that we've been doing. That's it's not just about if you have good well-being, we're talking about sleep at the moment. If you don't kind of try to optimize how you're preserving the work that you've done, then it will go down the drain. Which I think is, I only graduated last year, and I think especially when you're stressed and you've got a deadline and the exams are coming, these kind of you're not really in a position to be able to think, take a step back and think what's the most healthy thing. That if someone comes along and says, oh well, you need to actually make sure that the studying that you're doing is effective. For a lot of students, they're well beyond that. That's something that they're not going to really be able to process and actually use.
Yeah. And it's like when you're in that position and someone says to you, well, what you need to do is take a break and sleep, you kind of think, well, you just don't understand the problem I'm in. You just don't get it. And actually, the issue is that we very often, when we're in those kind of stressful situations, we do the opposite of what we actually need to do, because short-term logic says to us, if I do more work, I'll get more done and I'll be closer to the finish line. But that's because we are stressed. We can only think in the short term. And you can sometimes work longer hours. If it's for a day or two, it's fine. It's not going to cause you a problem. But if you're doing it for weeks, it causes a problem. And actually, when we're in those really busy periods, that's when we need to do even more to look after our well-being, because you've got to keep that momentum going. You've got to keep your energy levels up. And the only way you do that is by looking after your well-being. Otherwise, you just start to burn out. And burnout's an additional level on top of tiredness. But when burnout starts to happen, there are other neurological functions that stop working. So you've got to keep your brain working all the way through to the end of that final exam. And to do that, you've got to look after yourself.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I think a lot of the people listening, where if we're talking about high performing athletes and towards like the Olympics or whatever, it's not a surprise that they're looking after like their diet, their massages for their muscles, taking regular breaks. And I think even with marathons, like there's that idea of like toning down the training towards the race. And when it came to like finals and exams, from what I saw from students, the highest performing students kind of had that kind of outlook, as in it wasn't just about the studying, but they also had a healthy lifestyle around it to optimize. So on the day that they would be able to have an optimal performance. Like I think, and you're right in that, towards like in a high pressure situation like revising for exams, it's even more important to focus on how can you look after your well-being in order to get the best out of yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. And because as well, when you're in that place, when you keep yourself in that place, you can then also make your revision way more effective.
Yeah.
You can use more effective revision techniques. You can focus much more. And so the revision that you're doing is going to be way more useful than if you're trying to do it tired and unable to take in what you're doing. Because all that happens then is you realize you're not taking it in because you're too tired to take it in. And now you're also anxious about the fact that it's not going in, as well as being too tired to take it in. And now we've got two barriers to you actually learning.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're rested and you're focused and you're working hard in a really effective way, then it's actually all going to go in and it's all going to stick.
Yeah, interesting. Because I think if you're in that kind of place where you're quite stressed, you really want to get this work done, I think students in that position don't want to hear that, if you just keep studying nonstop, it's actually not going to go in, and it's trying to get them to be able to like calmly hear that, this isn't going to work, but there are alternatives that will work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes some of that is about knowing what effective revision practice looks like.
Yeah.
So, we know that it's really interesting that the research since the 70s has shown that when people become anxious about, let's take exams, for instance, when people become anxious about exams, they start adopting ineffective revision techniques. So these are the students who will also be doing things like rereading their notes and highlighting their notes as a way of revising, which we know doesn't work really. It's a really ineffective way of doing it. Students who are feeling more confident about the exam will tend to experiment a bit more. So because they're using different techniques to revise, it goes in because it's been coded in lots of different ways and lots of different times. But they'll also use things like retrieval practice, which is where you basically test yourself and then check your answers. Spacing, explaining things to people, studying for understanding and explaining the meaning of what they're looking at, all of which means it's better, it's more firmly held in the memory. And so they learn more, and then they notice that they're learning more, and then they feel more confident. So by the time they get to the exam, they really feel they've got it. So it's about that, because the other thing to remember in all of this, of course, is, if we think about applicants coming here, maybe going to do their A-levels, A-level exams are generally 3 hours long.
Yeah.
That's a test of stamina as well. If you get there and you're exhausted before you pick up your pen, then how are you going to do 3 hours?
Yeah.
So you've actually got to make sure you also arrive at the exam rested, with energy, ready to go for 3 hours. So again, you've got to turn up and be able to perform. So you've got to look after yourself physically to do that.
Yeah, because you wouldn't go on a run the day before your marathon.
No, exactly. Yeah, and this is why the night before the exam, actually cramming before the exam doesn't work. Again, the evidence is pretty clear on that, unless you've done no studying at all. If you've done no studying at all, cramming is a sensible option. But if you've studied and revised for the exam, cramming the night before actually is probably going to make you perform less well. Yeah. You're better off taking the night off, doing something else, and getting a good night's sleep.
Yeah. I think there's a big difference between that intense, stressful cramming and just kind of like a last glance over your notes.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that last kind of look through the day before, early evening maybe, just to remind yourself that you know it. Just to give you the confidence you've got it, and maybe just to check, was there one or two last minute things I just want to refresh, and then put it away and do something else to get yourself into a nice sleep the night before. So you arrive the next day and you've studied, you're ready, and you feel relaxed and you've got energy and you're ready to go.
It's quite interesting, because the main difference between those two approaches in that same situation is like the state of mind as you approach the notes and your like kind of well-being and how stressed you are. Because I
Mm,
think because I mean they're effectively doing the same thing. Well, I guess the latter person isn't going to spend hours the night before, and as they
mm.
shouldn't. But yeah, I think the biggest difference is kind of how stressed you are, your anxiety stuff that you kind of a lot of people forget is entirely linked to the academic performance the
Mm.
next morning.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And the way we think about ourselves, what's called self-efficacy and our academic self-efficacy in this situation, your belief in your ability to do this
Mm.
has a big impact on your performance. And so again, if you're using things like retrieval practice in your revision and you can see that you're getting the questions right, you can then trust that you know this stuff. You can trust that you can do it. If you've done practice tests and you're coming out okay on them, well, then you know how to do this. You can trust yourself. Whereas if you're revising in ways that aren't effective and then you're noticing it's not going in, that's just going to make you more anxious. And when you're anxious, it's much more difficult to think clearly and remember what you've studied anyway.
Mm.
So yeah, it really does make a difference.
So one of the things you do talk about in the book is how important self belief is when it comes to studying. I was wondering if you could like expand on that a little bit for I think because I think there's a lot of people who are students who either think self belief and studying are completely separate things, or think that um, kind of see like people who have an overwhelming amount of self belief as like kind of like a very arrogant attitude to working,
Mm,
and also leads to bad academic performance.
yeah. Yeah, because there's a balance in all things.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're overconfident and you don't put in the work, then you're not going to perform as you could do. And none of this is an argument against hard work. Hard work's good for us generally, but we need to
Mm.
define what we mean by hard work
Yeah.
because overwork is not good.
Yeah.
Working too many hours is not good. But actually focusing in your time and energy on something in a really committed way is really good for you. But I guess there's a couple of ways in which you can approach all of this. So some students kind of feel like they should know and be able to do everything straight away. And if they can't do it immediately, it's because they're a failure. It's because
Mm.
there's something wrong with them. It's because they're not good enough. You get all that imposter syndrome stuff. That's just not how learning works. Learning is always a process of not knowing, working at it, and then gradually becoming to understand it and to know it. It's when you come to university, it's inevitable you're going to come across some stuff that you don't understand straight away because that's the point. If you knew it all already, then it wouldn't need to take 3 years.
Mm.
But if you see that as just, yeah, of course, that's the process. I'm going to have to do some reading. I'm going to have to do some work on this. I'm going to have to learn it. And then in time, I will get this, then you're fine. If you immediately go into that spiral of, I don't understand this, it must be because I'm not good enough, then it stops you from actually doing anything to help about it. Or you're so anxious that when you try to, you can't go forward anyway. So it's those kinds of thought processes that we need to kind of be careful of, because that idea that you should be able to do it all straight away, it's a false thought. There's no way
Mm.
anybody can do
Yeah.
that. And becoming comfortable with not knowing is a really important part of learning. Becoming comfortable with the fact that you're going to make mistakes,
Yeah.
and that's absolutely okay because learning has to include mistakes. Perfectionism is a trap. It's the enemy of ambition. It's the enemy of learning.
Mm.
And letting go of that and being willing to just kind of go, right, this is a process. I know if I work at it and I use the resources around me, I'll get there. Then you will, basically.
Mm. Yeah, I think I it's definitely the case for the science-based subjects, problem-solving-based subjects, but it is true for all of them. But there is a feeling of when you have like your worksheet, your problem sheet, and you look at the questions, and it says like, I know, solve this problem. You look at the problem, and you're like, this might as well be in a different language.
Hmm.
And like if you talk to programmers, mathematicians, scientists, they've all been able to kind of stay calm, because I mean, because it's also a
Mm.
feeling everyone has.
Yeah,
I think that
absolutely.
that's the thing that you also forget, because you think, oh well, everyone. I've literally spoken to people who've said they've done this sheet, and I'm now doing it, and I have no idea what's going on. But you don't realize that everyone goes through that feeling of
Mm.
not being able to do it, and it's I mean it's quite literally connected, your self belief, to your performance. In if you don't believe that you can work out those problems, then you won't even try.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, there's other ways we can look at this. I mean, if you come across something like that and you've never come across it before, also, how exciting is that?
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
This is a whole new thing we're about to discover, a whole new thing you're going to learn. Um, and if you can get yourself to that space where finding stuff that you don't know or don't understand yet is really exciting,
yeah,
then none of that's ever a problem.
yeah.
It's only if you do that thing of, well, I should be able to do this straight away, that
Yeah.
you create a problem for yourself.
That's a really really interesting point. It's a really nice take, and kind of reviving the whole point of why students are there in the first place.
Yeah, and when you get to kind of the kind of research that I do now, I go looking for stuff I don't understand.
Yeah,
Because
yeah,
that's where it's exciting.
yeah,
It's this is a big complex problem. I don't even know if there is a solution to it, but that's the bit that just gets me, on the edge of my seat, because that's where the exciting stuff lives.
and it's I think it's important to let the students know that it's so satisfying once you do work it out.
Absolutely, yeah. When you get there, the sense of achievement and the sense of that self belief that it builds is
Yeah,
huge. Yeah, and very often our well being is at its best when we've taken on something difficult
Mm.
and we've mastered it.
yeah,
And as you said, it's a huge boost to your well being when you're able to do that.
nice. So, wanted to go back to your book, which, like, I mean, so I've read this over the past week, and it is a phenomenal book. I really wish that I'd read it before I started studying, because there's just so many like tips and advice that's so easy to understand, but as an 18-year-old, just no one's told you.
Mm.
And I think it really had a really massive impact in just the small decisions that I made as a student. Um, I think for anyone who's never thought about any overlap between well-being and learning, I think it's definitely worth reading. I mean, you don't have to follow everything at all. And I think you even say in the book that it's designed
Mm.
to be, the chapters for you to like choose which chapters to read. Doesn't have to be read
Mhm.
cover to cover. But yeah, I think it's stuff that I think we were speaking about this before. That as graduates, you look back and kind of makes a lot of sense. And it's easy in hindsight to say, oh, yeah, now having done it,
Mhm.
if I'd done this, my learning would have been a lot better.
Yeah.
But it's so much harder to do that beforehand, especially if no one's told you.
Yeah, absolutely. You can't act on what you don't know. But it's interesting. I was talking here last night to a couple of former students of the college,
Mm,
one of whom basically had done what it says in my book, looked after his well-being,
mm,
studied the stuff he was passionate about, um, worked hard, but worked hard in blocks, and then went and did other things,
nice.
and graduated top of his class. And his partner, who had overworked, read everything, done everything, and was looking back saying, I can clearly see if I'd worked less and focused a little bit, my focus in on my studies a little bit more, so I was working less but targeting more, I would have performed better.
Yeah.
And I guess but it is that thing, if no one tells you, and if the culture around you says working more is always more beneficial, of
Mm,
course you're going to do that, because we know students care about their studies. They want to do well. They want to
mm.
perform well. So if they think that's what's going to help them, that's what they do. And they're willing to make that sacrifice. It's just, not only is it not necessary, it's counterproductive.
Yeah. And I think another thing that we were talking about before was that students, they receive a lot of academic guidance in
Mm.
terms of which modules to choose, which paths like might be beneficial to their interests, but they don't, and yeah, they receive advice on how to do well in the exams, but they don't receive a lot of like kind of social or lifestyle advice,
Mm.
even though the decisions you make on both fronts will lead to the same goal in your academic performance. And I wanted to hear like what advice you had for students who are like feeling like they have FOMO, like fear of missing out, and
Mhm.
wanting to feel like they want to go to every event, but also wanting to perform academically well.
Yeah, so it's about, so the balance will be right, different balance for different people,
Yeah.
right? So one of the things about human beings is, we're not the same. It's what makes us so interesting, but it means there's no general rule as well. So you've got to figure out your own balance for yourself, and that'll also change over the course of your life, the right balance for you. So part of it's a little bit of experimentation, but you can do just little things like, sitting down every now and then thinking, right, do I have the energy levels I need, or am I really tired? Am I enjoying what I'm doing, or actually am I feeling like I'm overstretching myself? And then making adjustments in response to all of that. There's a little thing in the book about looking at your needs and seeing how well your needs are met, and seeing if they're in balance or not, which you can use as a little audit to just kind of think, well, how am I doing at the moment? And then you just make small changes to bring that more into balance over time. But you can't be everywhere and do everything at the same time. You've got one body, one brain. It can only be in one place. So prioritizing and making decisions about a balanced diet of stuff in your life. Some stuff that's about fun, some that's about your academic work, some things about looking after your own physical well-being, that kind of thing. So that you get a balance across all of it, and you'll generally just enjoy life better if you can do that.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to stress the part when you said that there's different balance for different people, because I think it's easy to keep comparing yourself to other people and thinking that, because if you always compare yourself to other people, you always feel like you should be doing more.
Yeah. The comparison thing is also a trap. It really is, because it's irrelevant what somebody else is doing.
Yeah.
It really is. If somebody else is studying more hours than you, but you're doing the hours you're doing and you're performing well, then it's irrelevant. So it's about you finding the right balance that works for you. And, some people need to spend more time with other people. Some people need a lot of time by themselves. Work out what balance is right for you, but genuinely think about what the right balance is. What does it feel like? Some people will sometimes talk themselves into thinking that they need more time alone than they actually do, and they would benefit from some time with friends. So, looking at all of that stuff and just experimenting every now and then. If you get into a bit of a routine with stuff, which is really helpful, routine and structure is good for us, but just experiment with changing it every now and then, see what happens, see if it helps you. And always just be on the lookout for those little improvements that you can make.
Yeah, and I think also different people prioritize different things. So I think it's easy to think, oh, well, that person's doing that, maybe I should be doing it, not realizing that that person you're comparing yourself to isn't doing all of the stuff that you're doing. Yeah. And I think that's the kind of part of the story that people miss.
Absolutely. And when we're comparing ourselves to other people, we edit the life we're comparing ourselves against. We edit out all the bits that aren't working, and we just look at the bits of their life that seem to be better than ours, and thinking, why can't I have that? And that's in everything. That's if you're looking at other people's lives on social media. We generally post on social media, the times where I'm happy, look at me smiling, I'm on a beach, it's glorious. Not, I just had a row with my partner, that's why they're not in the photograph. And so we that editing of life that we then compare ourselves to, you're not comparing yourself genuinely to anybody else. You're comparing yourself to a really edited version, which is just punishing yourself.
Yeah.
So, and it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter what other people are doing. Is what you're doing working for you?
Yeah.
That's the question that matters.
Yeah. It's a really interesting point that you bring, because I think in your book, you talk about phone notifications, social anxiety, social media, and I think these are kind of like very new issues that are coming into play when it comes to well-being and learning. I was wanted to ask, what part does social media have to play when it comes to well-being and learning?
Yeah, it's difficult because the evidence is still coming in about social media generally. Yeah. What we can say is there is significant evidence that for some people it can be really negative. Now, that's not to say it can't also play a positive role for some people as well. There's probably going to be a mix. But managing it and controlling it is really important. And part of the problem at the moment is that we still don't have really well developed social rules around the new technology because it's so new. So I grew up before mobile phones existed. So when I was a student, we had a payphone in the whole of residence. But back then, if I do this with people my age or around my age, and I said to them, remember when we just had a landline at home, what was the latest time you would telephone anybody at night? And all the way across the UK, the answer is 9 o'clock. You don't make a phone call after 9 o'clock. If the phone rings after 9 o'clock, it's because someone's died.
Interesting.
Yeah. So you panic when the phone goes after 9. So that was a really clear social rule, but that technology had existed for decades.
Yeah.
So we developed rules around it that everybody knew and understood. Now, what's the latest you would send a text message to somebody? Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we don't have any social rules yet that say, so when is it okay to switch off from looking at it? At what point is it okay to be asleep, not looking at your text? Or at what point are you actually ghosting people because you're not responding to them?
Yeah, that's it.
And so what I would think that the solution I've seen some students use or some young people use around this is make an agreement with your social group. Just
Mm.
say to them, look, at this point in the night, I'm switching my phone off and going to bed and sleep, and I'll pick it up again the next morning and look at it. And I won't respond in between because I'm going to be asleep. And then everybody knows, and no one misinterprets the fact that you haven't responded. And you're not really going to miss out. What are you going to miss out on 3 o'clock in the morning? Let's be honest.
Yeah.
And then if everyone in your group has the same agreement, then it's fine. And you've created that social rule for yourself. And that can give you then that certainty of knowing you don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. Nice. Yeah. I mean, I think, everything that you're saying makes a lot of sense. I personally, I can't remember why I made the decision when I was quite young, but I've never had notifications on my phone, or at least for like social media. I think I would have the badges icon. So on the app, that if the number goes up, I know someone's messaged me. So I'll actively choose to click on the app.
Yeah.
But, and I think always having my phone like that is just it's a different world for me to understand that for other people. Like they have a phone where there's pings of notifications, and it actively takes their attention away from what they're doing
Absolutely.
to their phone. And
yeah, it's important to understand what notifications do to us. Notifications change what's happening in our brain really quickly. So we get a shot of adrenaline every time we get a notification. It fires what's called the orientation response in the brain, which then disrupts whatever we've been focusing on before. And so all of that then has to resettle in our system before we're actually able to refocus. So if you're studying with your notifications on, when the notification comes through, people kind of think, well, it doesn't matter, it's only a minute. It's 20 minutes to refocus.
Interesting. Okay.
So it's not 1 minute, it's 21 minutes for you to get proper focus back again. And if in that time you get another notification, then you've delayed your focus again.
Yeah.
And the other thing that happens is that while your phone is on with the notifications on, even if nothing's coming through, part of your brain continues to focus on it. So you've not got full attention on what you're studying because part of your brain's still scanning the phone. So you effectively reduce your functioning IQ. So again, creating rules with your friends to say, when I study, I'm going to switch my phone off. I'm putting it on airplane mode and I'll switch it back on when I'm finished studying. So that again, you make that study time a really focused time where you work hard and focus on just what you're studying. And then when you come off, you look at your phone and see what's come through. And generally, it's what we see is people spending, 8, 12 hours trying to study, but with their phone on.
Yeah.
When you'd be better switching it off, studying for 6 hours.
Yeah.
And then switching your phone on and going and engaging with the rest of your life.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Turn off notifications. Heard it here first.
Absolutely. Yes. Turn off your notifications when you're trying to do anything else.
Yeah.
I mean, I have to do it, it's a thing I've had to teach myself as well with work, because with emails and stuff like that coming through, I have to switch them off if I'm trying to work on something. Otherwise I keep looking.
Yeah. It's emails. It's the same. Yeah. Exactly. Exactly the same story. Yeah. I mean, I personally, especially when I was a student, I never had Instagram on my phone. I have it as a web browser. So if I want kind of not exactly the same as emails, but if I want to see if someone's message, I'll go on a web browser and see. But then, because another thing is, it's not just about alongside notifications, you also want to avoid scrolling.
Yes.
I think, and the same. I think it's a common phenomenon where we're looking at our phone and we struggle to remember how we started scrolling, but we're just in the mid. And you want to. I mean, I've never got into TikTok, but maybe think apps like TikTok and Instagram have them as web browsers on your device, but not on your phone, especially if you're trying to study.
Yeah. The thing you got to remember is they're designed by really clever experts in behaviorism. Okay. So they employ behaviorists at those apps. And what they're doing is they're working out how do they keep you online for longer. Because the longer you are on their app, the more money they get. Yeah. That's how it works. So they will do what they can to put you into trance, which is why you can't remember why you started, and to keep you scrolling and to keep you there. And what that means is you just lose time that you didn't want to spend on it. It's fine to engage with those ads, but choose what you want to go on and look at, choose how long you're going to be there for, and then come off it. But remember that on the other side of this, you've got really clever people doing everything they can to stop you from being in control of your decision making around all of that. So absolutely, as you say, anything you can do to create a little bit of a barrier to getting sucked into that, so much the better for your well-being. Yeah. And
I think that part of the story of why the apps are there, who's making them, what their interests are, is I think at least, I mean, for kids and young adult students, they're very unlikely to have come across that.
Yeah.
So they're just being kind of, their attention's being harvested, and they
Mm.
kind of doing it without any consent, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And, you know, I don't think most of us probably think about the fact that the time we're spending on an app is making somebody money.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's, you know, that this is what it's there for. And, you know, there are, I think some authors have written about the fact that, you know, some of those apps, what they could do, it would be really easy for them to bring up on the app if any of your friends are geographically close to you. So you could actually all go and meet up in person. But none of those apps are going to do that,
I see.
because if you did that, you'd come off the app.
Yeah. God. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
So,
yeah.
you know, they're not necessarily just there to bring you all together. They're there to make money out of your
No.
attention.
Yeah. Of course. Yeah. Is they should make some more regulations on that, which yeah, is a bit out of a
Mm.
bit out of our remit, sadly. In the book as well, you have these like two really nice terms that I think is important, like really categorize two really important ideas for students to understand when it comes to their learning: surface learning and
Mhm.
deep learning. I was wondering if you can explain those ideas for us.
Yeah, so I mean, there's a number of different ways of understanding how we do our learning, but I think this is a useful one. There's been some interesting research in Finland around these ways of approaching learning and their impact on well-being overall. So if we think about deep learning, first of all, deep learning is when we really focus in on what we're studying because we care about it, we're passionate about it, we find it meaningful, we want to understand more. We're writing assignments because we want to point out something that we think is wrong. You know, we want to solve a difficult problem. And that's because we're intrinsically motivated by what we're studying. So the motivation is coming internally by the things we care about. What we generally see with deep learning is that students who take an organized, deep approach, they tend to perform better academically. Their well-being is better, and that's partly because their learning is benefiting their well-being. Because if you're studying something that you're really passionate about, actually you get lots of really good payoffs in terms of your well-being from that. And so they perform better, their well-being is better, and they enjoy their time at university better. Students who surface or learn are what we call extrinsically motivated. So they're motivated by the external things like grades. What do I need to do to get that grade? And I will focus on that, and I will do that. And generally what we find with those students is they underperform. And that's for a number of reasons. One is because when we start focusing on getting the grade, we also start to worry about what happens if I don't get the grade. And then that anxiety starts to get in the way. It's also because when we surface learn something, when you just get to know something for an assignment or to get a particular grade, you're also more likely to forget it afterwards. And then if you look at how things work through university, so you study something in your first year, you surface learn it, you get the grade you want, you come to your second year, we're now doing a module that builds on that information in the first year, but you've forgotten it.
Yeah.
So now you're struggling to catch up. So in your second year now, it's more difficult to perform there. As a result of all that, those students tend to be more anxious, their well-being tends to be less good, and they enjoy their time at university less because they don't feel as in control of what's happening. Now, unfortunately, our schooling system, particularly in this country, quite often drives people towards surface learning. Do what you need to do to get the grade, and don't deviate outside that. Don't read more widely. Don't follow your passion. Just memorize this lot and regurgitate it. But it is a change you have to make when you come to university, and so being willing to let go of the way you've studied up until now, and to start engaging with that depth. So looking for, what is it in what I'm studying that I care about, I'm passionate about? What do I find meaningful? What do I find frustrating? What do I think is wrong? And connecting to that, because connecting into that will make it much easier for you to build understanding of what you're studying. You'll want to study for longer. You'll be more motivated. You'll think about it when you're maybe not studying as well, because you'll just find it really interesting. And then all of that has good payoffs to your well-being. And you'll be learning much better, and you'll be building those foundations for future years as well. So your academic performance will sustain throughout. But it's important to find that emotional connection with what you're studying. Because when you care about it and you're passionate about it, it's so much easier to study it.
Because that emotional connection it's never been nurtured from the school system, at least in the UK. In that, so it's a lot of students, I imagine, either whether it was a good teacher or something outside of school that is from a young age, or from sixth form or whenever, they kind of realized they had a genuine curiosity for something, but in terms of like the system, you rightly say the exams and the grades, it very much encourages surface learning, which like at uni, I think there's the risk of if you're only surface learning and you're only kind of like ticking boxes to get to the next step, you look back and kind of think that there was a missed opportunity once you realize
Yeah.
the opportunity that you did have for like really diving into something that you genuinely care about.
Yeah, absolutely. And that also then has, I mean, it even has, implications for what you do after university.
Mm.
Because
Yeah.
if you think of, we get really focused on grades in this country particularly, but some other cultures as well. But even if you get a really good high first in your degree,
Mm.
doesn't necessarily guarantee you're going to get the job you want afterwards, because you'll go to an interview, and if they test
Mm.
out the depth of your understanding and learning and find it's not there, they're not going to appoint you. And even if it does get you the first job, you're not going to progress in your career in the same way, because you don't have the depth of understanding
Yeah.
that you would be expected for somebody taking on that kind of role. So the studying for depth isn't just about looking after your well-being now and learning well now. It's also about the preparation it gives you for the rest of your life, because that deep learning means you're better prepared for the career that you want and the life that you want to live later on.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point because it's a very well known phenomena and quite taboo to talk about uh, new graduates not knowing which career they want to go down,
Hmm.
and not knowing what job they want.
Yeah.
And there's the kind of like the culture suggesting certain grad schemes and certain jobs that a lot of people do, but they don't really know whether they want to do them or not. And to prevent someone from being in that situation would be to encourage them at the beginning of university to follow what they genuinely like, because they'll be more likely to know what they want to do after
Yeah.
university as well.
Yeah. And you build the skill of working out what you enjoy and what you're looking for and what you
Mm.
want out of life. The other thing just to say that's important about all of that, though, it's okay to not know what you
Yeah.
want to do.
Yeah.
It's absolutely okay not to. I mean, I still haven't figured out what I want to do. But this idea that you should have a really clear career plan that takes you through the whole of your life, it's just not how life works.
Right. Yeah.
I said to you at the beginning of this, I ended up doing this by accident.
Yeah.
And almost everybody that I know is in a career they didn't expect to be in.
Mm.
So what we do is, I'm a big believer in something called planned happenstance, which is where you develop yourself, develop your skills, your knowledge, your understanding, and look out for opportunities that align with that.
Mm.
And that will take you on a journey through life, doing really interesting stuff that you enjoy. Probably won't be as expected. And obviously, there's not, I'm not saying don't think about what the career that you want or the possible careers that you might want, but don't think you can plan it in a straight line. Don't think there's a
Mm.
tightrope that you've got to walk through the rest of your life, because there really isn't. It will zigzag around.
Yeah. No, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, me myself, like I have like a rough idea, but it changes every couple of years, every year.
Yeah.
And I think if you can, you're right in that as you're working it out, if you can help people along the way, then it makes like the
Yeah.
work like worthwhile.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And just, sharing your stories like that, and sharing the story of the fact that, I mean, I know, things are tricky at the moment in terms of economic and stuff like that, but
Mm.
for most of us, I mean, I left the university back in the 90s, and it was just the assumption was that your first few jobs were going to be necessarily that great, and you'd bumble through for a few years working out what you wanted to do, and then that was just the norm. It's a cultural story that's been created really since fees came in, that students should have a career plan and go straight into a graduate job that leads to a career that leads them off into this. And actually, it's not how the world works, and two, it's really unhelpful, because it creates an expectation that then says to students, if you don't have that, you're failing in some way, rather than that's normal. That's what happens to everybody. A few small exceptions. Obviously, if you're doing a medical degree, then you can, but those are the exceptions.
Mm. Yeah.
They're not, for most students, it's going to take a while to work out what you want to do next. And it's okay. It's all right. And if you try something and it doesn't work and it's not right for you, that's okay too. You've just discovered that something you don't want to do. That's fine. It's just part of your journey. Think about why it didn't work for you and what it was you didn't like, and then that'll help you work out what you want to do next.
Yeah.
It's okay.
Nice. Wow. Yeah. Um, Another idea that you have, quite similar to this, what we've just been talking about, is you have this idea in your book that thinking creates reality,
Mm.
and I was wondering, like, what do you mean by that, and how does it overlap with, I guess, both well-being and learning? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, we've touched a little bit on some of this already, but essentially what this is about is that as human beings, the world is too big and too complicated for us to take it all in and make sense of it all at once. Our brain's not that powerful. So what we do is we create kind of stories and narratives about who we are and how the world works. And we have these thoughts. And those thoughts then basically create the reality that we experience.
Mm.
So if you think about watching a horror film
Mm.
and you're watching it and you're scared, in reality, there's no reason to be scared. It's on a screen. It can't touch you. It can't do anything to you. But in your imagination, you're engaged in it and you switch the light on going up the stairs that night because your imagination's telling you there might be something on the stairs. Yeah. So it's created a realistic experience that you're having. You are genuinely scared. And that follows through when we think about, talking about earlier on with self-efficacy, that if you believe you can't do something, then it will kind of lead you into a position where you don't do the stuff you need to do it. And then you prove to yourself you couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's that really, it's about being aware of our thoughts and thinking to ourselves. I think a helpful question quite often is that thought helping me? And recognizing that our thoughts are just thoughts. Yeah. They're not facts. They may feel very real. They may absolutely feel real to us in that moment. Doesn't mean they are real. Doesn't mean that they're genuine. And we don't necessarily have to go with them. So challenging your thoughts sometimes and thinking, is that actually helping me? Is it necessarily true? Is there another way of looking at this? And finding those other ways to think about the problem, which is why sometimes it's going to be helpful to talk to other people, whether that's friends or family or accessing support. And there's lots of support available at the university, because it can just help you to look at it in a different way and change the way you think about it. And when you change the way you think about it, the reality of your experience changes.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. I think, it reminds me of mindfulness, like they're trying to cultivate a skill of like where one like trying to observe their thoughts, and then I think if you're able to do that, then you can really clearly distinguish how they're separate to reality, which also actually really increases one's ability to critically think. But I wouldn't recommend someone mindfulness in order for them to be, like, I don't know, academically more strong, because that kind of is like the backwards way of going about it. But
it is, but I think you're right in that if you can develop that ability to kind of be critical, not to criticize yourself for the thoughts that you have, because it's important not to drawn into that, but to become aware of your thoughts being just thoughts, and then being able to make choices about them, then you absolutely can bring that skill to when you're reading an article and thinking, well, this is an opinion I'm being given here. Is this opinion correct? What evidence is it drawing on? It's a similar process to see how evidence-based is the thought that I'm working with.
Yeah, exactly.
You know? And actually, absolutely using that skill. And if you have a really good critical academic skill, using it on your own thoughts to go, okay, can I interrogate them in the same way? There's no reason why not to use that strength in that way.
No, yeah, exactly.
And to give you then more control over your own thinking.
Yeah, I completely agree. Like, so what I meant by critical is not being critical of yourself.
Yeah.
But there is that skill of being able to kind of take yourself out of a situation or out of a thought, or if you're reading an article, taking yourself like out of the article and then thinking, well, it's not just about what's written here, but it's also about the context of the time, the author, but it's also, you can also apply those skills, as you say, to your thoughts. And the more you're able to kind of like take a breather, pause, observe your thoughts, how evidence-based are these thoughts, like, is there, like, are these thoughts created by some beliefs that aren't necessarily true? That would definitely help your if, especially if you're doing humanities degree, your ability to be critically think there. But also massively, and the more important thing that will help with is your well-being.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because then when those anxious thoughts come along that are, feeding you those lies, which is anxiety loves to do, you're more able to observe it and notice the anxiety attempting to manipulate you, and to be able to say, well, actually, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do what you tell me. I'm going to just do what I need to do.
Yeah, because you were saying before that people like we like to tell ourselves stories, and there are like people do have like certain narratives, certain stories that they keep telling themselves,
Mm,
not realizing and yeah, as you say, thinking with like thinking becomes reality. They have these like preset stories that they believe in, and then their reality becomes that. And it's what you want individuals to be able to do is pause, recognize that this is actually just a story that they've told themselves and isn't necessarily true, and
mm,
they can like believe it not to be true
mm,
if they want to. So another thing that you've also mentioned, I heard in your book or in conversation, is that there's you have a, that there's a they have a belief that students feel like they have to make a choice between either well-being or
mm.
graduating. I was wondering
Yeah.
if you could expand a bit on that.
Yeah, I think it used to be a thing that we particularly saw with PhD students, but it's definitely come back into the undergraduate community now as well. This idea that if you're not sacrificing your sleep, if you're not giving up your time, you're not overworking, then you're not taking it seriously,
Mm,
and that you will inevitably feel if you're not putting in every minute of every day, and that if you're doing anything other than studying, you should feel guilty.
mm,
You should feel guilty if you're enjoying yourself rather than studying. And it's an anxiety driven thought that it's not true. I mean, there is that it is in the narrative in the culture, but it's really unhelpful. There's only so many hours a day your brain can actually perform academically. There's a thing called cognitive load, and there's a limit to what we can learn in a one go.
mm,
And then you need an opportunity to kind of integrate it into your learning, and then you can have another go again. So the idea that you can just keep going just doesn't really make sense. But it's a belief that people have. And I see it particularly, we see it coming up when students coming up to A levels, that what they do is they give up everything else. So you stop your hobbies, even
mm.
though that's the thing that probably helps you manage stress.
Yeah.
You don't see your friends, even though that helps you discharge stress. You give up a bit of sleep. So now you're feeling a bit more tired and a bit more irritable, and you study more. And then you feel really, really anxious.
Mm,
And that interferes with your ability to learn. Whereas if you just kept up your hobbies, saw your friends, and slept properly, you'd have all the energy you need to study, and you'd arrive at your exam with the energy that you need. So I always encourage students that, of course, when you come to year levels, of course, you're going to have to study more. You're going to have to give more time to it. But keep your hobbies up. Keep going to see your friends. Keep up that balanced lifestyle, because it'll enable you to perform better overall.
yeah.
Um, and that is the reality of it. That all the evidence tells us that's true.
Mm,
It's only the stories that tell us it's not. So
mm.
we need to interrogate those stories, look at the evidence, and do what the evidence tells us.
And so you mentioned physical exercise, which is something we haven't talked about yet.
Mm.
Is there evidence to suggest that yeah, like physical exercise alongside like taking breaks, as we've talked about, also helps with well-being and learning?
It does. It's a bit difficult to tease out exactly the direct relationship between exercise and learning. I mean, exercise and well-being, absolutely, we can see it really clearly. Exercise helps you manage anxiety much more, burns off cortisol. It's a huge impact on, I mean, we do know it does impact on cognitive functioning and things like that.
Okay.
But even just movement,
Mm,
just getting up from your desk regularly and moving around and going outside for short breaks, that on its own has a really measurable positive impact on well-being and on your brain function, on your ability to learn. So
mm.
taking regular breaks really helps. Taking and moving around while you take the break, not just going on your phone. Um,
Yeah.
and actually get up, give your focus outside, go and look at a tree, go and look at nature if you've got it around you,
Yeah.
if you're lucky enough to have that.
Mm,
That can really make a difference. But exercise will help because helps us sleep better. It helps us to kind of de-arouse our system overall, and keeps us physically fitter. And then obviously, when you come to the exam, you have more energy in your body,
mm.
to be able to keep going for 3 hours.
Yeah, I used to swear by going on walks when I
Yeah.
study, like
Uh,
especially from the library. It's like
yeah.
a 5, 10 minute, 15-minute walk.
There's a really good literature around the benefits of walking.
Mm.
As I said, this doesn't have to be, going to the gym or working out for hours. Just
No,
walking
yeah,
is
yeah,
really, really important. And if you can do that, so, but also there's lots of stuff around the benefits that going for walks has on creativity.
yeah,
So if you're stuck on a problem, get off your desk,
yeah,
stop looking at it, go for a walk. By the time you come back, you probably have a solution.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, even in the exam, just the walk to fill up my water bottle and to come back,
Mm,
suddenly I'd find that like I've worked it out. And as you're right in that yeah, if you're like stuck on a problem, one of the best things you could do is like go for like a quick, a relaxing walk. Some of the best, most creative things, whether it's work or just decision making that you need to do moving forward. At least I've had on walks.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Quite often when it's a really complicated thing, if I go out and I walk, by the time I come back, I've figured out what it is I need to do.
The idea of like clearing your head, clearing the clutter.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I was lucky that at uni I lived in quite centrally, so I was quite close to my bed. I also really liked 20 like very strict 20-minute naps.
Okay. Yeah.
I've been told that there's some research in that, but I wouldn't quote me on that. But it really
there's evidence that it does work for some people.
Okay.
Yeah, and again, this is a bit about what works for some people, what doesn't. So for some people, actually, quick 20-minute or a maximum 45-minute naps, because that's one full sleep cycle, can really help. Absolutely. Some people, so I can't do that, because if I do that, then I'm sluggish for the rest of the day. So again, it just depends on the individual. But I absolutely have worked with people in the past, and certainly worked with students for whom quick naps really help.
Yeah, I think yes. If the nap's too long and you kind of I don't know the language to describe it, but you enter like a deep sleep, then you wake up and you feel disorientated. What time of the day is it? And then I feel really sluggish. But if it's like a very quick 15-20 minute nap, even if I don't fall asleep, I'm just resting.
Yes.
Suddenly I feel so much more energized to go back at the work.
Yes.
And so if I had a 3-hour period where I'm working, and so if it's the library, which isn't too far from my desk, which for a lot of Cambridge students this would be the case, I would squeeze in a 20-minute nap in Deg and then go back to work, and would feel very reinvigorated, and really squeezing out every minute of that study time, rather than it being 8 hours and very slow, sluggish.
Yeah. And I think it feels better as well when we can revise in that way, where we have a block where you're really focused and you get a lot out of it. You come out of it feeling great, because you really feel like you've got something, you've done well, you've revised well, and then you can go and enjoy the rest of your day. But the other thing about that is that this is the value about experimenting to look for small improvements. You know, that experiment that you did to try with the small nap, and they found it really worked for you, which is fantastic. And but it's the important thing about that each of us needs to just do little experiments to find out what works for us, and to find what's the equivalent of that for you. But yeah, that's brilliant.
That's a good point, because not most people didn't do the naps, but it just worked for me. And a few other people as well. So, and yeah, you're right. It is trying to work out what works for you. So I'm talking about like studying in short bursts from time to time. It's something that you mentioned in your book, I remember, and could you expand a bit more about people thinking that if you're going to study, it has to be for a long amount of time, and that there isn't any benefit in studying for like a 15-minute period?
Yeah, again, this is if you think about that thought, it kind of doesn't really make any sense, but it's one that we all hold at some point. I mean, I definitely had it, that if you don't study for a 3-hour block, what's the point?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But actually, if in 15 minutes you can sit down and focus on one thing and drill into it and really understand it and come away with it more secure in your memory, well, that's great. That's something you didn't have before. And there's actually some good research that you're better off studying in a series of short blocks than one long block, because as your brain gets tired, it becomes less effective at learning. So 3 1-hour blocks can be significantly more effective than 1 3-hour block.
Yeah.
And not building up these walls around what you allow yourself to do, of saying, well, unless I've got 3 hours, there's no point. Because you're then just depriving yourself of the opportunity. If you've only got an hour, it's fine. Just do an hour then.
Yeah.
Focus in on something, give it an hour, and then go off and do whatever it is you need to do next. But don't stop, because what happens is you then just start making yourself anxious. Oh, you're looking in your week going, where am I going to get these 3-hour blocks from? And you can't see it in your diary, and you start to panic. You don't need them. You don't. You can do this in short blocks. And again, so the evidence and the research on learning is short blocks of revision, short blocks of work are actually more effective at building up your memory than those long blocks of learning.
Yeah, like a spaced repetition.
Yeah, absolutely. And then the other thing as well is, if you can think about there's something called spacing. So one of the things we have to do with our learning is we actually have to start forgetting what we've learned and then going back and revisiting it. And that's what strengthens it in our memory. It's called the forgetting curve. If you just put in spacing learning in Google, you'll find guidance onto what's the ideal amount of time to leave in between. So if you study something on one day, I think you should then come back to it on the third day and then on the
Yeah.
eighth day. And if you do that, what happens is you're maximizing that forgetting, remembering,
Yeah.
and then it's all strengthening in your memory again.
Yeah. And the thing about those techniques is that it never suggests that you should at one given time study for a very long amount of time.
No,
It's
absolutely.
always
Yeah,
small amounts.
absolutely. And again, all of the kind of the evidence and the research around this, none of it really stacks up the idea that you should just lock yourself down to for 6 or 8 hours in one go. Because it's just not how our brain functions. I think some of this is about that we kind of think in metaphors. We've started to think like the brain as if it's like a computer, and studying is just like uploading data into a computer, and so more time means you get more data uploaded. But the brain isn't a computer;
No,
it's a biological thing,
Yeah.
and it gets tired. And once it gets tired, it stops functioning.
Yeah. No, yeah, exactly. No, yeah, I don't know if you've heard of Pomodoros. I don't know why they're called Pomodoros. It's quite a rogue name. But it's the idea of studying for 20 to 25 minutes and then a 5-minute break.
Yeah.
I used to, that was like, I swore by Pomodoros. The risk is when you're taking that 5-minute break, that you've got to be quite diligent to come back to the work after like roughly 5 minutes. But and sometimes also you might just be in a complete flow state where it's all going well and you don't need the break. But once you kind of have a balance, I would my day would be kind of really to I have some objectives that I need to do in terms of work objectives and questions that I wanted to go through, exam questions, but also like a rough aim of how many Pomodoros I wanted to do. So then it would always, my day would kind of be, it would never end up being just a 6-hour block, work endlessly until it's done. Which the only time I think one could really do that is if they were in a phenomenal amount of pressure that's really beyond, like a situation that's beyond as important as exams are, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, so the only situation I can, yes, absolutely, and again, we can do that as one-offs.
Yeah,
you absolutely can. So if, for instance, you're somebody who gets, sometimes universities use 24-hour exams where they set you a question. The 24-hour exam, by the way, doesn't mean you work for 24 hours. It means you've got 24 hours from start to completion. And working in a longer block then might make a bit of sense for some of it. If there's a bit of just churn that you need to do, if you're in a science thing and you just need to run some stats, then and that's just going to take a block of hours, then it might make sense to do that then. But then you need breaks around it to give your brain a chance to recover. But yeah, absolutely, you can do it for in short bursts. You can do that longer working occasionally, but otherwise the breaks. And I said Pomodoro does work for a lot of people. But I think what you pointed out is really important but to do it flexibly, not to be too rigid. If you do suddenly find yourself in flow, just keep going until the flow stops, and then take your break. But yeah, a lot of people find that really helpful.
Yeah, and I think whether it was with sport or studying, I really believed in flow state and trying to get into a flow state, which is counterintuitive because you can't try to be into flow state. You kind of have to let it happen. And one of the ways that kind of I try to optimize the situation for me to go into flow state is if I just kind of study for a few minutes and try, at some point I will like fall into a flow state. Like it's anyone who
you can't force yourself into it, but you can create the circumstances that make it more likely.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's again about the experimentation for yourself to work out what are the circumstances that are most likely to allow you to go into flow. Now again, notifications switched off, phone switched off, really helps with that. Being rested and feeling that you've got energy definitely helps you go into flow state. And being interested in what you're studying. Starting with something that you're interested in, that you care about, really helps you go into it. And if you get that kind of mix of curiosity, well-being, and lack of distraction, you create the circumstances. And then also be willing to work around all of that. So some people find reading something unrelated, first of all, or even reading fiction before you sit down to work on it, just for 5 or 10 minutes, just to get your brain into that kind of focused state, and then you transfer your focus. or some people find music can help at the beginning. So it's just about, or some people find that actually going for a walk, setting your desk up and then going for a walk first, gets you into flow first. So it's just about experimenting and looking for the thing that works for you, that creates the ideal circumstances when you could go into flow.
Yeah.
I think that's right.
So coming close to the end now, I've just got a few more things. Things that you mentioned right towards the end of your book, not to give a spoiler, I guess. But you have this idea about being a radical, having a radical balance, and being a rebel in your own life. I just wanted to hear like what you mean by that for the viewers.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about all those kind of cultural narratives and myths we talked about earlier on, about the things that you should be doing and the way you should be planning, and actually the fact that the evidence tells us the opposite is true, then actually to decide that you're actually going to take care of yourself, that you're going to look after your well-being in order to improve your academic performance, that's an act of rebellion. It's an act of rebellion against a toxic cultural narrative that says what you should be doing. And to recognize and say that all this stuff that was being pushed on us is nonsense. It's utter nonsense. So I'm not going to go along with it.
Yeah.
I'm going to see through it. And I'm going to actually recognize that as a human being, there are things that I need. And if I meet those needs, I perform better. So that's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to find the balance in my life. What's the balance that's right for me? And for the people around me as well, to think about, the people around me and how I support them to find that balance as well. And we're just not going to go along with all these cultural myths that are kind of trying to push us down a path that makes us feel unwell. And I say that's an act of radical rebellion then to do that. And if we all did that, we'd shift and change society completely.
Yeah, because those people who've like gone down, it's a cliche to use the phrase roads less traveled by, but it applies here. And you see people kind of like following their own gut instinct and going down a path from what they believe. They are really inspiring for us to potentially do the same.
Absolutely. And it's what graduates do, right? That's the point. You come here, you learn, you develop your ability to think about the world, to look at the evidence, to make decisions. And then you go out into the world and you do something that's different to what's been done before. And it's graduates who then go and change the world. And that's kind of the point, really, that part of this is about, by living differently, by being willing to prioritize well-being over all of the kind of the extrinsic nonsense that people tell you is going to make you happy, but which doesn't. That actually you end up living a life which is flourishing and which is fulfilling and which you enjoy. And just by living it and demonstrating that, you have a push and a nudge on the world to make a difference.
Nice. I just wanted to pick on something you just said, because in the book you also talk a lot about friendships and social lives and different types of friends, and you were also just saying about how there's like a lot of like extrinsic nonsense from like cultural narratives and from society and expectations that what people should do, but there is a big difference between like the noise from strangers and what a society expects people to do, and the advice and kind of like the advice and opinions that our closest friends have for us who have our like well-being at heart. I guess, and there's a big difference between the two.
Absolutely. And I think particularly, again, in a world of social media where that noise from strangers is going to be constantly being beamed into us. And, all those, you see those social media posts, if you want to be successful, here are 12 things you must do. Most of them utter nonsense. And so just being willing to kind of, as I said, this is about, you talk about statistics, about detecting the signal amongst the noise. Ignoring the noise and listening to the signal that's coming from the people who care about you and from the actual evidence that comes out of the research. And those two things combined are much more likely to guide you to stuff that's going to be helpful than all of that nonsense out there that's telling you, do this and you'll be happy, do this, you'll be successful. Because that's people trying to make a name for themselves.
I think if the people who really care about you and you have your interests at heart think that you're doing the right thing, which tends to be like a very small number of people compared to the world, but if you find yourself in a position where your small, like tiny community are like very supportive of what you're doing, then you're probably on the right track.
Yeah, and if you've got that supportive community, or if you build that supportive community around you, they'll have your best interest at heart. They won't want to see you overworking and overtired. They'll be the people who suggest maybe it's useful to take a break. And then, you know, they're probably seeing something you're not, in which case maybe listen, take a break, come back to your work in a bit, and look after yourself. Yeah,
because I think we were talking about the Drama Society Footloose that's in Cambridge just before, and it's easy to say that for a lot of those actors who are very successful now that they made the right decision, but then it's hard to imagine that when they were here as students, they would have had to have made a choice in between, and between like a career choice.
But I think a lot of students though who are here don't necessarily even notice that that's happening. I think some people come here with the idea that they've just got to work all of the time, and other students, it doesn't occur to them that that's what they should be doing, and so they just go off and have a different life, and they're fine, and they perform perfectly well, and they go off and have good careers afterwards. And again, it's that thing about the fact that the idea that, well, every student here will be working 12 hours a day, it's actually just not true. But if you have that belief, again, that creates your reality, then that becomes what you have to do. But actually, when we look around and we look at what students at Cambridge actually do, you know, even here in college, I mean, I was walking around the other night, there was a choir, there was a social event, you know, people are involved in all sorts of other stuff. Because that's one of the advantages of coming to a place like this, is the richness of all those other opportunities, the great opportunities for socializing, for learning other skills, for other opportunities to experience things. And that then makes your learning much richer. So you're taking a much richer experience out of university than just your course. But it also means when you come back to your academic study, you're ready for it. You're more refreshed. You're ready to go again.
Nice. Yeah. And lastly, like, you had this idea, I think it's very, probably ties in a lot of the things that we've said so far. But just for anyone who hasn't heard of the idea of what visualization is, if you can explain that to us, and how that, I guess that applies to future planning, and I guess for a first year at the start of their university, also how they're going to envision parts of their university life.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's really just it's just a little exercise visualization in which you get yourself nice and calm and relaxed, and, you know, can help if you close your eyes and just imagine a future scenario that you would like to see for yourself. And then when you come back from that, to think about what was it about that you really liked? What was it about that scenario that you like the look of? Because it's not that you can necessarily create that scenario ideally, but there was something about it that you liked. And then how can you work towards that? So if you imagine where you want to be at the end of your first year, what experiences do you want to have had? How do you want to have enjoyed it? And then you can just look at how that would look and what it would be. And then basically sit and think, right, how do I plan that? How do I start creating a pathway to that, or multiple pathways to that, and then see where it takes you? And it's useful to come back and do it again every now and then, because that visualization of what you want might change, which is perfectly okay. It's normal, because you're going to learn more as you go along. You're going to change your mind on things. But just having that sense of the idea of working towards something that you find attractive and that you like the look of. But visualization can also help in other areas. So, like, you know, if you've got like a presentation to give, and if you can visualize yourself standing up and doing it well, then actually you're rehearsing it in your mind. Sports people do this all the time. They rehearse this all the time. You're rehearsing in your mind that thing coming true, that you doing it, because anxiety will want to make you rehearse in your mind it going badly. So if you can rehearse it going well a few times, it starts to build in your mind that pattern in your mind that of it going well, and then you're more likely to do it well when you stand up and do it. So it's just a tool that we all have, and it's just about how you use it. It's worth just saying there are some people who won't actually, when they visualize, they won't actually see pictures. It doesn't matter, as long as you can just get the sense of it in your imagination. Then it still works. So it's just that rehearsal in your mind's eye, really.
Yeah, I think I used to do this quite a bit when I was a student, more for sport. But one of the things I noticed is that the anxiety. So if you didn't do any visualization, which to be fair, most people don't, but it's a growing thing, and then you go into the exam room and it's like the first time you've done a university exam, then the anxiety, it's going to be your first time coping with that. But if you kind of visualize and practice, think through what that process would feel like, and you do that several times,
Mhm.
then you, by the time you come to the exam, you've actually gone through those emotions several times,
Yes.
and then you're at a much more calmer state and a much more optimal state to do the exam.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And if you can visualize it with slightly different variations, so you're not just visualizing for one scenario, because then if the scenario in reality is a little bit different, you can be thrown.
Oh, I see.
So imagine doing it in a different room or in a different place in the room than what you're expecting, or you're sitting beside someone different to who you were thinking of. But exactly right. And imagining going into the room and, being able to relax, letting the emotions go, focusing on your paper, and then going through it and imagining it going well, and you finding the answers. You're just building up that memory pattern so that when you're coming to it, your brain goes, oh yeah, we know this.
Nice, yeah. And so last, I wanted to just kind of going back onto cultural narratives. One thing I wanted to raise is that I guess I've realised that there's a big difference between someone who feels like that there's a huge pressure to study 12 hours a day. But then if that person was to kind of think about whether it's through visualization or just what they kind of want for themselves, and they realize that they are really interested in their course and they do want to spend a fair amount of time in a healthy way, but they want to take it seriously, then they're not going to be driven by working endlessly to fulfill an extrinsic expectation.
Yeah.
But I guess what it sounds like from what you've been saying is that students can study their courses at university like kind of on their own terms.
Yeah, absolutely. And the more you can do it on your own terms, the better it's generally going to go.
Yeah.
And listen, the other thing as well is academics really like it. When students come into the room and they're excited about some aspect of the course and they want to know more and they want to study more, that's what academics live for. you know? So the more you can do that and shape your interest and start directing it, because then when you get into your final years, when you're doing your final piece of work that you are in control of, you have a much better sense way out of what it is you're going to want to study and what you're going to want to do. And you're going to be more confident about doing it because you've been doing it for 3 years. But the other thing that's important to remember is learning is good for us. Learning is actually good for our well-being. If you look at some of the other models of well-being, like the 5 ways to well-being, learn is one of the 5 things. So it only becomes a problem when we start putting performance and doing in our mind as the key thing. Focus on the learning and focus on learning stuff that you're passionate about and that you care about. Actually, that's good for us.
Yeah.
I say it can be exciting, it can be motivating, it can be stimulating, it can be challenging sometimes, but like you were saying earlier, but challenge can be good for us as well. Taking on stuff that we think we're going to be able to do if we work at it hard enough and then achieving it, it's really good for us as well. So we don't have to be scared of learning or to think that learning is itself a problem for well-being. Learning can be really good for our well-being if we approach it in the right way and we get the balance of all the other stuff.
Yeah, no, exactly. Oh, I think that brings us to an end. Thanks, Gareth, for this phenomenal podcast.
No, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's a really important message for upcoming students, and I mean, really for everyone. Like, I think emails was the best example, showing how everything that we've said really does still persist.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah, it does. Well, yeah, and thanks for the viewers for watching, whether it's on YouTube or your podcasting platform. Yeah, stay tuned for next time, and we'll see you again.
Thank you very much.
Nice. Cool. Was there anything else that you wanted to...
No, I think that probably covered it.
Okay.